Welcome to the world behind midnight. Tonight's file was unsealed after a sick-man SEAL unit entered the Grand Canyon on a classified eradication order and came back with 3 men. No footage, and a story that JSOC has spent 4 years trying to legally categorize. There is a 14-minute gap in the mission audio. 14 minutes of silence on every recording. Body cams, radio logs, JTAC uplink, all of it blank. When the signal returns, only 2 voices are audible. They are not giving status reports. They are not calling for extraction. They are describing something standing at the canyon rim, watching them, that should not exist. And it brought friends. The briefing was held underground, not metaphorically, literally, beneath a parking structure in Flagstaff, Arizona, inside a mobile SCIF unit that had been rolled in 3 hours. Before the team arrived, and would be gone 3 hours after they left. Lieutenant Commander Amos Vetch remembered the smell of the place more than anything else. Recycled air, hydraulic fluid, and something underneath those smells that he couldn't name at the time. He would name it later. He would name it fear, but not his own. The fear of the people who built the briefing. The fear of the people who had been down there before. The mission packet was lean. Deliberately lean. Vetch would later understand. 6 operators from SEAL Teammates Ironvale Detachment. Insertion via rappel at the canyon's restricted northern corridor. Grid reference classified even now in the partial transcript. Objective: locate, assess, and neutralize a pack of unclassified biological entities that had killed 3 geological survey contractors and 1 Park Service ranger over a period of 11 days. The word neutralize appeared 4 times in the document. The word animal did not appear once. Petty Officer First Class Dara Salini read the packet twice and asked the question that nobody else had. She asked what the entities were classified as in the biological threat matrix. The briefing officer, a man in civilian clothes who never gave his name, told her the matrix did not yet have a category for them. Salini wrote that down. She wrote it down very carefully, because in her experience, when government infrastructure didn't have a category for something, it wasn't because the thing was small. It was because the thing was large enough to require an entirely new drawer. They inserted at 0230. The canyon at that hour was a different geography than the one tourists photographed at noon. The walls absorbed the darkness rather than reflecting it. The headlamps were almost counterproductive. They created a cocoon of visibility that made everything beyond the beam feel closer, denser, more deliberate. Vetch led the descent on rope, Marcus Thel anchoring from above, Celine third, with the signals array strapped across her back like a second spine. The remaining 3 operators, Das, Kyer, and Fabre, followed in silence. Nobody spoke except in hand signals. The briefing had been explicit, minimized acoustic output below the rim. The reason for the acoustic protocol became apparent 11 minutes into the descent. Thel, halfway down the face, stopped moving. Vetch looked up. Thel was pressing his palm flat against the canyon wall, his fingers spread wide. Head tilted at an angle that meant he was processing something his eyes weren't giving him. Vetch held his fist up, freeze. The team froze. 7 seconds of absolute stillness. Then Thel released the wall and made the hand signal for vibration, sustained, non-wind source. He had felt something moving through the rock. Something large. Something below them. Vetch logged it as geological. His own debrief transcript, which we have partial access to, shows he did not believe it was geological even at the time. He logged it as geological because geological had a response protocol, and the alternative did not. They reached the canyon floor at 0318. The operation zone was a corridor approximately 40 meters wide, flanked by walls rising 200 feet on either side. The floor was irregular, layered sandstone shelves, dry tributary channels, boulders the size of industrial vehicles. Celine activated the signals array and immediately flagged an anomaly. The thermal scan showed 11 heat signatures within a 300-meter radius. 6 of them were the team. The other 5 were stationary, distributed in an arc that curved around the team's southern approach vector. An arc, not a random scatter. A deliberate geometric formation that suggested either prior knowledge of the team's insertion point or an intelligence framework that Celine's entire professional training had not prepared her to quantify. She called it up quietly to Vetch. Vetch looked at the display. He looked at it for a long time. Then he asked her if there was any possibility of equipment error. She said the array had a 1.3% error rate under optimal conditions, and these were not optimal conditions. He asked what 1.3% looked like on a display. She said it looked like noise, not like an arc. He nodded. He did not call for extraction. He moved the team into a wedge formation and advanced south. The first contact was not visual. It was acoustic, but not in the way anyone expected. Das, on the left flank, stopped and raised his hand to his chest. Not a signal, a physical reaction, involuntary, like a man who has just felt his heart skip. He was experiencing the subsonic resonance. They all were, within seconds of each other. A pressure in the sternum that had no directional source, that seemed to be coming from the rock itself, from the walls and the floor simultaneously, as if the canyon were breathing. Celine later described it as feeling like standing inside a speaker playing a frequency below human hearing, while the volume climbed in increments so gradual, you could not isolate the moment it became unbearable. Fabre was the first to see one. He was covering the team's 6 o'clock when his head turned, not because he heard something, he would later specify in his partial testimony, but because the darkness in a specific location changed quality. It became heavier, more intentional. He brought his NODs up and looked directly at the canyon wall, 30 meters behind the team's position, and what he saw was not pressed against the wall. It was part of it, or had learned to use it that way. 7 feet tall, crouched at a lateral angle that defied the geometry of the position, one forelimb braced against the stone, the other hanging loose. The skull lowered between the shoulders like a ram, preparing to charge, except that it was motionless. Perfectly, architecturally motionless. The nods showed him the shape, but not the eyes. Where the eyes should have been, there was an absence of light that the NODs couldn't resolve. Not darkness, absence. A place where the image simply stopped rendering, Fabre said, very quietly. Into the team channel, 6 o'clock, contact. I need someone to tell me what I'm looking at. Nobody could tell him. That was the end of the first phase of the operation. That was also, though none of them knew it yet, the moment the pack stopped waiting. Vetch's instinct was containment of information before containment of the threat, a decision he has defended and recanted in equal measure across the debriefs that followed. He did not immediately call the contact up the chain. He pulled the team into a defensive cluster behind a sandstone shelf approximately 4 feet high, and ran a visual sweep in all directions. The thermal showed the arc had shifted. The 5 signatures were no longer stationary. They were moving, but not toward the team. They were repositioning, spreading laterally, extending the arc into something closer to a full encirclement, maintaining a consistent distance of roughly 80 meters as they did so. They were adjusting their geometry in real time. They were solving for the team's position the way a thinking entity solves for a variable. Celine was watching her display with an expression Bell later described as the face of someone doing math and not liking the answers. She flagged a second anomaly. The 5 signatures were not moving at the same speed. 2 were fast covering ground at a rate inconsistent with bipedal movement of any documented species at that scale. 3 were slow, deliberate, measured. She theorized aloud, quietly, that the pack was operating a dedicated flanking element and a holding element, that it was using role specialization. Vetch told her to keep that theory between the two of them. She did not keep that theory between the two of them. It is in the debrief record, and it is one of the reasons the debrief record is still technically classified, despite the partial release. The first direct aggression came from above. Nobody saw it descend. The canyon wall on the team's eastern flank was 200 feet high and sheer, and one of the creatures came down it. Not by rappelling, not by any sequential movement the cameras could track. It simply appeared at a position 30 feet above the canyon floor that it had not occupied a fraction of a second before, as if it had materialized at that elevation. Kier's body cam captured 2 frames before the impact. 2 frames of a shape against the rock that the analysts later described as a structural impossibility, consistent with a joint architecture that has no human analog. Kier was hit from the flank, before he could bring his weapon up. He was not killed. He was carried. The creature had him by the plate carrier and was moving laterally across the canyon floor faster than the team could track with their Node-S, before any of them had completed a trigger pull. Keir was gone in under 4 seconds. What followed was not a firefight. Vetch is precise about this in his testimony. A firefight implies two parties exchanging fire within a comprehensible tactical framework. What followed was something closer to a collapse of formation, of protocol, of the cognitive architecture the operators used to process incoming information. Das and Fabre opened fire on the eastern wall, where the creature had descended. The rounds hit stone. Thel moved to recover Keir's position, and was hit by the subsonic resonance, at an intensity that he described as physically nauseating, not painful, specifically, but disorienting, in a way that made target acquisition impossible, as if the frequency were designed to degrade the neurological capacity for spatial orientation. He went to one knee. He did not go down further because Celine caught him. It was Celine who first understood the architecture of what was happening. She grabbed Vetch's arm and told him they were in a kill corridor. She told him the canyon walls were the weapon that the pack was using, the confined space, and the acoustic resonance as a coordination and disorientation tool simultaneously. That the geometry of the encirclement was specifically designed to prevent any clean line of fire without canyon wall behind the target, that every angle they had was a potential ricochet vector. She told him they needed to move toward the narrowest point of the corridor, not away from it, that the pack's coordination would be disrupted by tighter quarters, in a way that the team's superior optics could exploit. Vetch made the call. They moved north, toward the narrows. This is where the audio record goes silent. Every recording, body cams, team radio, JTAC satellite uplink, registers a clean signal until 0347 hours and 31 seconds. At 0347:31, all recordings simultaneously dropped to silence. Not static, not interference. Silence, as if someone pressed mute on every device simultaneously. The recordings resume at PAY. 14 minutes and 13 seconds of nothing. What happens in the gap is reconstructed entirely from the physical evidence and the fragmented, contradictory accounts of the 3 survivors. The reconstruction is incomplete. It will always be incomplete, because the 3 survivors do not agree on the sequence of events, the number of creatures involved, or most significantly, the fate of Das. Fabre says Das went down in the narrows, killed by a pack member that came through a fissure in the canyon wall that was not wide enough to admit anything of that size. Thel says Das was alive when the audio resumed. Celine says she never saw Das after the team entered the narrows. 3 operators, 3 irreconcilable accounts of a man who does not appear in any casualty documentation because JSOC cannot categorically confirm what happened to him. When the recording resumes, Vetch and Celine are audible. They are moving fast. Thel's locator beacon is active, but his voice is not on the audio for another 90 seconds, suggesting he was either separated or incapacitated during the gap. Vetch is giving coordinates in a flat, controlled monotone that Celine later said was not calm. It was something beyond calm, something on the other side of calm, a register she had never heard in a human voice before and did not have language for. He was giving coordinates for an emergency extraction at a point 1 kilometer north of their last confirmed position. He was giving them to nobody, because the JTAC uplink was still silent on the command end. Celine's voice on the recording says one sentence before the team goes quiet again. She says, "There are more of them at the rim." The extraction point was a dry plateau shelf, accessible by rope from the canyon rim, a contingency site that had been pre-rigged with ascenders during the insertion phase. Vetch had selected it specifically because of the sightlines open on 3 sides, with a single approach vector from the canyon floor below. What he had not accounted for, and what Celine's thermal confirmed as they made the approach, was that the creatures understood sightlines too. The 2 signatures at the rim were not watching the plateau. They were watching the approach route to the plateau, positioned on opposing elevations, in a configuration that would give them attack angles on anything ascending the fixed ropes. Thel rejoined the team approximately 200 meters from the extraction point. He came in from the west at a run, and he was not speaking when he arrived, not because he was conserving breath, but because when he opened his mouth to speak, the subsonic resonance hit its highest recorded intensity, and his voice simply could not compete with the frequency. He communicated in writing on a laminated note card from his kit. The note card, recovered and partially readable, says, "One is different, larger, stays back, watches, it is choosing." Choosing. The word that the analysts fixated on. The word that appears in 17 separate internal documents and is redacted in 12 of them. The pack had a hierarchy. There was a coordinator, a larger specimen that had not engaged directly at any point in the engagement, that had remained at an elevated position and, by Thel's account, had been making decisions, directing the others, not through vocalization, not through any audible signal, but through the micro-vibration pattern transmitted through the canyon stone itself. A language in rock, delivered through a medium that human beings had been walking across for millennia, without understanding it was infrastructure. Vetch made the final operational decision of the mission. At 0419, he decided not to ascend the fixed ropes. He decided instead to move 200 meters east, along the rim approach, and scale an unrigged section of the canyon wall, using the team's emergency climbing kit, a slower, more exposed ascent that the creatures had not pre-positioned for, because it was not a rational extraction route. It was not rational. That was the point. The pack was solving for rational behavior. Vetch had concluded, based on everything that had happened in the past 90 minutes, that the only viable tactical asymmetry the team still possessed was irrationality. You cannot predict the behavior of a species that abandons its own behavioral framework. The ascent took 41 minutes. 41 minutes of vertical movement on a canyon wall in darkness, with the thermal signatures of at least 4 pack members visible on Celine's display throughout, circling below and along the flanking walls, monitoring the ascent without engaging it. This is the element of the operation that Vetch returns to most consistently in the documented debrief sessions, not the attack in the Narrows, not the 14-minute gap, not the loss of Kier and possibly Das, the 41 minutes. The fact that the pack watched them climb and did not follow. The fact that the creatures, which had demonstrated the capacity to descend 200 feet of vertical canyon wall in under 4 seconds, chose not to ascend. Chose the word again. The word, with the weight of a taxonomy, the government still doesn't have a drawer for. When the 3 survivors reached the rim, Vetch, Celine, Thel, it was 0500 hours. The eastern sky was beginning to differentiate itself from the night in the thin gray way of desert mornings. They lay flat on the rim and caught their breath for approximately 90 seconds. Then Celine sat up and looked back over the edge. She did not speak for 11 seconds. Then she said, "Count them." Vetch and Thel came to the edge and looked down into the canyon. The pack was assembled on the floor below, not hiding, not distributed in tactical positions, but gathered in a loose cluster near the center of the corridor, visible in the growing pre-dawn light as dark shapes against the pale stone. 7 of them, not 5, 7, 2 more than the thermal had ever registered simultaneously. They were facing upward. They were looking at the 3 survivors on the rim. The largest one, the one Thel had noted. The coordinator was separated from the group by approximately 10 feet, positioned slightly forward, its head tilted at an angle that Vetch would later describe, with evident discomfort, as attentive, as if it were studying them the way they had spent the entire night trying to study it. Vetch raised his weapon. He looked through the optic. At that range, in that light, it was a viable shot. He held the sight picture for 4 full seconds, then he lowered the weapon. He was asked, in every subsequent debrief, why he did not take the shot. His answer was the same each time, he said, because it was waiting for me too. The extraction helicopter arrived at 0522. Vetch, Celine, and Thel were aboard and airborne by 0524. As the helicopter banked east, Celine was facing the rear window. She watched the canyon recede. She watched the floor, where the pack had been assembled, as it fell away into the pale light. She counted. She counted twice because the number was wrong. She told Vetch. Vetch did not look. He has not returned to the canyon since. He has not explained why he chose not to look. The number Celine counted from the helicopter was not 7, it was 9. 2 more than had been on the floor when they boarded. 2 that had not been visible from the rim. 2 that had arrived between the moment the helicopter touched down and the moment it lifted off a window of under 90 seconds from some origin point that the post-mission analysis has never identified. The terrain for 4 miles in every direction was clear on radar. There was no approach vector. There was no concealment position capable of hiding a 9-foot bipedal organism from aerial thermal detection. The 2 additional signatures simply appeared, and when the helicopter was gone, according to the one functioning body cam that managed to transmit a final image before its battery failed at 05 to 7, the 9 of them on the canyon floor below were no longer looking up at the sky. They were walking north, together, in formation. The operation was classified the same morning. The eradication order was suspended pending biological assessment. The biological assessment has been ongoing for 4 years. It has not produced a report. The Havasupai adjacent corridor in Sector 7 was quietly added to the list of restricted zones requiring dual agency authorization for entry, a list previously occupied exclusively by nuclear testing sites and active chemical remediation areas. Kayer's family was told he died in a training accident in the Atlantic. Das has no official death record. He has no official missing persons record. In the government's documentation framework, Petty Officer 2nd Class Raymond Doss still exists as an active duty service member on indefinite remote assignment. He has been on that assignment for 4 years. He has not communicated with his family. Nobody has told them to stop waiting. Vetch was medically separated from the Navy 8 months after the operation. The separation paperwork cites a nonspecific neurological disorder affecting spatial orientation and threat assessment. Vel is still active duty, assigned to a desk role at a base in Virginia, and has refused every interview request except one, a single recorded phone call, in which he said the following: "We went down there to kill something. We came up. Whatever we left down there, it knows the difference between us and it now. It made a file. The way we make files, and its file on us, is better than ours on it." Selene resigned her commission 14 months after Canyon Dirge. She now works as a contractor for a private geological survey firm. She has declined every debrief beyond the mandatory sessions. She carries a laminated card in her jacket pocket at all times. It is a printout of the thermal scan from 0318 hours, the first reading. The arc of 5 signatures surrounding 6 operators. She has never explained why she carries it, but she has been observed looking at it in moments of stillness, counting the signatures with her finger, her lips moving, as if she is checking the math against a conclusion she arrived at a long time ago and cannot stop verifying. The canyon does not care. The canyon is 400 miles long, a mile deep, and older than anything that has ever tried to categorize it. Whatever is living in its walls has been there longer than the survey markers, longer than the trail maps, longer than the names on the geological strata. The pack on the floor that morning, watching the helicopter bank east in the growing light, they did not disperse when it was gone. They did not retreat into the fissures and the shadow pockets of the corridor. They held their formation on the pale stone floor and they waited, the way they have always waited, with the patience of something that understands it has already won every version of this encounter that has ever been attempted. The biological assessment continues. The corridor remains restricted, and at 0347 hours, on the morning of March 11th, 4 years ago, for 14 minutes and 13 seconds, 6 of the most highly trained combat operators on the planet encountered something that removed them from the documentary record as easily and completely as a stone removes a ripple from still water. 4 years later, nobody has filed it, because filing it means accepting what it implies. And what it implies is that the eradication order sent 6 of America's finest operators into a canyon that something else had already claimed, and that something else decided, for reasons we cannot determine, that 3 of them were worth keeping, for now. Subscribe to The World Behind Midnight to uncover the next operation before it disappears, because some secrets are best left behind midnight.